Greetings there, everyone. This is Jed Schlackman, and in this video I'll be speaking about our life's plan from a soul or spiritual perspective. Most of the time we're looking at and evaluating our life from what you might call the ego's perspective or the personality's perspective, which is a human perspective. However, our soul, our higher self, often has a much different way of looking at things in our life, a more holistic view of things, understanding how everything in our life kind of fits together or comes together to serve a greater purpose. Even the things that we may feel negative about, things that we may regret, things that are disturbing to us, are actually things that on another level, on a spiritual level, a greater aspect of ourself has actually chosen those challenges or ordeals as part of its spiritual evolution. So with that in mind, I'm going to be reading a little excerpt from a book. This is the book called Your Soul's Plan. And this is a book by Robert Schwartz. And in this book he presents a number of case studies of people's life planning from the other side, so to speak. So he incorporates information obtained through regression, past life or spiritual regression hypnosis, as well as the input of spirit guides, information that's been received through psychic mediums who can access that information about a person's life plan. So the excerpt that I will read from now relates to a case of a person who was dealing with alcoholism and other related struggles in his life, and how that was part of a process of spiritual growth in a sense. So let's see what this says here in this case study. We were just told that Pat had planned not only his alcoholism, but the surmounting of that addiction. Having seen this pattern in many life plans, I understood that Pat had yearned for both the contrast between being and not being an alcoholic and the experience of making that shift. As souls, we value both the contrast and the process of creating it, and neither would be possible without the duality provided by a physical lifetime. I was still curious about why Pat had selected that soul as a parent. He chose his father in part because he knew his father would die when he was young, I asked. Yes, said Stacy. Stacy is the psychic medium who's kind of channeling this information at this point. And he wanted that experience because it would then lead to alcoholism? And Stacy responds, he knew that would set him up for the alcoholism along with the genetic factor. Did he know before incarnation that he was going to be an alcoholic for several decades? Yes, she responds. Why did he want to experience alcoholism? The healing of fear was one motive, but I wanted to see if there was more to Pat's pre-birth plan. Because he had lost his connection with all that is, with God, with his own divine nature and spirituality. This was the road to rediscover it. He was unable to find it otherwise. You know how we learn the hard way? This is one of those examples of learning the hard way. This was the insight I had hoped Stacy and her guide would be able to provide. Stacy mentioned earlier that Pat had wanted to focus on spirituality in this lifetime. Now we knew why. Apparently, in some of his previous incarnations, Pat had lost his perception of God. Having thus had the experience of losing his spirituality, he now wanted to have the experience of recreating it. And Pat had wanted to do more than simply experience spirituality. Were that his sole desire, he could have planned an entire lifetime of spiritual pursuits. Instead, Pat had wanted to have a feeling of profound disconnection so that he could then have the experience of building and therefore more deeply knowing his connection with God. I felt we had reached the core of Pat's life blueprint. Now that we knew Pat's objective, I was eager to understand why he had felt his plan would work. How does the experience of alcoholism bring him back in connection with himself and God? I asked Stacy. Perhaps Pat's roadmap could show the way for others struggling with either alcoholism or their spirituality. And Stacy answers, the return to seeking and achieving spiritual connection is motivated by the total lack of it, which the alcoholism causes, Stacy pointed out. In other words, Pat had designed a classic learning through opposites life plan. He had wanted to heal unresolved fear from previous lives and experience, while in body, a strong connection with God. Prior to birth, he had identified alcoholism as the catalyst that would drive him toward those goals. But what if Pat, quote, bottomed out with alcohol and stayed there? There was risk in his plan. I asked Stacy if Pat knew before birth that he would be able to turn things around. I am told this has to do with cyclical timing in his life, she replied, as she listened to her spirit guide. He knew that by a certain age, at the end of a certain cycle, he would have the wherewithal to overcome the addiction and meet his goals. At the beginning of the session, Stacy had mentioned that Pat has been balancing karma through his relationships, a common purpose of a physical lifetime. Stacy, I asked, what does alcoholism allow Pat to accomplish in regard to relationships? The relationship with the substance becomes primary over the emotional relationships with others. After so many decades, you realize that this bottle does not take the place of true unconditional love. Your longing for unconditional love supersedes the longing for anesthesia, and the anesthetic effect lessens with long-term use. In general, I am being told that because of alcoholism you experience the lack of relationships, and that motivates you to want relationships. Very true, Pat agreed. Yet any number of life challenges could have driven Pat to reach his goals. I asked Stacy if he had considered other challenges, like having a handicapped child. I am told that being a handicapped child's parent was not in his experiential awareness, Stacy answered. He had just come from a lifetime where he had seen the other soldiers around him using alcohol, not just for their wounds, but for their psyche. That is what he was familiar with. Stacy's response confirmed what I had seen in others' pre-birth planning, that souls often select challenges to which they have some previous exposure. I'm going to pause the excerpt there, since it brings up some interesting ideas and insights about our spiritual life planning. Often we're planning or choosing something that's rather challenging, something which society might look upon in a negative way as part of our growth process. In a sense, we go through the shadows in order to more fully understand and embrace the light. So as we look at ourselves, at our own lives, and the lives of other people around us, we can do so with a more broad perspective, with more compassion, with more openness to greater possibilities, rather than jumping to quick judgments or conclusions. We can see that the soul or higher self has a more expansive perspective a more holistic perspective in which everything can serve as part of our spiritual growth. This brings us kind of into a more non-dualistic perspective where we can appreciate that everything in existence is part of one infinite indivisible whole. So there's, in that context, nothing bad or wrong about what any particular person may be experiencing in their life. We may be able to perceive that the person could choose a more ideal or more pleasant circumstance, but even the unpleasant, even the challenging or disturbing circumstances are contributing to the soul's development. For those that are interested in exploring more about your own soul's plan or your own pre-birth observation or analysis of your life, you may want to proceed to have this type of a reading that was shown in the book there. Someone who has a very deep spiritual, mediumistic type of ability where they can communicate with the soul or higher self through their own inner spiritual guidance to receive that type of insight. While you can also go through a hypnosis process where you yourself are guided into that between lives realm, where you can communicate with your own soul or higher self, or interact with your own spiritual guides or alternate selves in a sense to receive this type of guidance or insight. I've been doing past life regression sessions, facilitating them for almost 2 decades now, and it's somewhat remarkable what people are able to access in that state. So it's something that I encourage people to pursue, to explore this, particularly if you're having any challenges or concerns in your life that you're looking for a greater understanding of, and perhaps looking to get some relief or resolution with. Often once we're able to gain this insight or see things more from the soul's perspective, we're able to receive the lessons or wisdom that we had intended to access in this lifetime, and that enables us to progress forward on our journey, to kind of take the next step on our path to move on to newer lessons or challenges in our life, since we've now, in a sense, understood or mastered what we had hoped to at this point. I hope that this particular talk has given each of you some insight, some ideas about your own personal journey. For now, I would like to wish each of you a wonderful day. Namaste.